When the galaxy begged for unity, Earth went dark. No answers. No ambassadors. No threats. Just silence. And everyone knew what that meant, because the last time humans didn't speak, 5 empires ceased to exist. Now, the Council is calling again, but humanity isn't picking up. And the stars are trembling. They begged. They pleaded. They sent emissaries dressed in silver, voices trembling with diplomatic rehearsals. But Earth never responded. Not a whisper. Not a flicker of data from the void. And across the galaxy, that silence rang louder than any declaration of war. In the high chamber of Imaraxis Prime, under the sapphire glow of its ancient solar crown, the Galactic Council convened for its 76th emergency session in as many days. The Voric Dominion had consumed another 5 systems overnight. The screams hadn't even reached subspace before the planets fell dark. A scaled official from the Drex Consortium banged a 6-fingered fist on the crystalline table. Earth must be contacted. Now. We all know what they're capable of. If anyone can stop the Voric. They refuse to engage, interrupted Grand Envoy Souther, voice like grinding sand. Their gates are closed. Their transponders are blank. They've even jammed our long-range diplomacy probes. A quiet murmur passed through the chamber. A murmur of fear. Of memory. Because they remembered what happened the last time humanity went dark. The Clenthary Empire, once spanning 38 sectors, had threatened Earth's expansion rights. In response, Earth gave no speech, issued no formal warning. They simply deployed something the galaxy had never seen before: precision extinction. In 27 hours, Clenthary worlds became black glass. Their moons cracked. Their war fleets shredded by invisible artillery. No human soldiers ever touched the ground. And afterward, Earth sent just one message to the Council. Don't interrupt us again. That message still played in training simulations, uncut, unsoftened, across a dozen military academies galaxy-wide. It was not a warning. It was policy. Souther scanned the chamber. The Voric are unlike anything we've faced. A self-evolving hive machine that adapts in real time. We've lost over 300 billion lives. Our fleets are exhausted. If Earth remains silent, we will fall. The insectoid ambassador from Lethtak clacked his mandibles. Maybe they believe we deserve to fall. After what the Council did. Silence followed. Bitter tight. Everyone knew what he meant. The embargo. The sanctions. The political games meant to keep Earth from growing too fast. It worked for a time. But then Earth stopped responding to any of it. And instead of collapsing, it thrived. Alone. Unchecked. Watching. Souther's voice dropped to a whisper. They remember. That's why they're not answering. A younger diplomat, barely old enough to hold a voice in the chamber, hesitated before speaking. Then perhaps we sense something else. Not words. Not pleas. A gesture. Something they'd respect. And what would that be? Souther snapped. The youth swallowed. Sacrifice. At the edge of the Orion Scar, beyond the Council's deepest reach, a lone shuttle bearing the mark of neutrality drifted into the Terran exclusion zone. Its pilot, a thin-boned Varnari monk, flew without weapons, without shields, without any expectation of returning. A suicide mission dressed in diplomacy. The moment the ship crossed the boundary, Earth's defenses activated. Not with lasers. Not with missiles. With silence, complete sensor blackouts, gravity wells disrupting navigation, artificial static screaming through subspace. But the monk continued, trembling hands on controls, chanting softly in his native tongue. Then, just as the shuttle began to destabilize, a corridor opened in space. Not natural. Not technological. Something else. A corridor of black light. He entered. And vanished. 3 hours later, every major broadcast array in the galaxy glitched. And then it began. A human face, unmistakably Terran, appeared. Aged, scarred, eyes like broken stone. The chamber froze. Cade Vox. Dead for 10 years. Or so they'd been told. Message from Earth, he began. No preamble. No greetings. We heard your distress signals. We saw your ships burn. We listened to your cries. And we did not care. Gasps rippled through the council. We warned you. We told you to stop treating war like a negotiation. You bred your enemies in petri dishes of compromise and cowardice. You made the Vorik. Not in labs, but in committee chambers. He leaned forward. You want help? You'll get none. Earth will not fight for your survival. But we will fight. Just not with you. The screen cut to black. Panic erupted. The chamber collapsed into shouts, accusations, desperate arguments. They've abandoned us. They're planning something. Why broadcast now? But Seltzer sat in silence, eyes fixed on where Vox had just been. Because behind his words, there had been something more. Not apathy. Preparation. He stood slowly. They're already at war. The chamber fell silent again. They're not ignoring us because they're undecided. They're ignoring us because they've moved on. They've calculated. They've planned. They're already executing. What do we do? Asked the young diplomat. Seltzer turned, voice distant. Pray they don't consider us collateral. Meanwhile, in the hidden military fortress orbiting Neptune's shadow, Vox stood before a screen of flickering stars. Below him, fleet after fleet launched from orbital slip bays, dark, jagged ships armed with weapons the galaxy didn't even have names for yet. His second-in-command stepped beside him. Council's in meltdown. Took the bait. Good. Vox's voice was ice. Think they'll figure it out? They will, he said. Too late. He looked down at the file in his hand. Operation Eclipse. The plan was already in motion. No alliances. No declarations. No mercy. Just war. The way humans knew it best. The Vorik weren't just winning. They were erasing. Systems with centuries of life and memory, gone. Council fleets fought like desperate children, swarming, screaming, dying. The war wasn't fair. The Vorik didn't make demands, didn't offer terms. They consumed. Adapted. Upgraded with every death. But Earth wasn't fighting that war. Earth had already chosen a different path, one that didn't involve debates, appeals, or partnerships. The Council watched, powerless, as the human-Terran relay network went dark. Every gateway, every listening post, every beacon, vanished off the grid within an hour. 216 Terran vessels disappeared in that same window. Not destroyed. Just gone. No trails, no transponder echoes. It was as if they folded themselves out of space. General Cade Vox, back from the dead and colder than ever, stared at the silent boardroom of Earth's High War Command. None of them asked questions. They already knew what came next. Begin Operation Black Veil. With that command, Earth's deadliest doctrine activated. No more simulations. No more listening. The fleets moved. In a Council observatory ship lurking near the Eridanus Divide, a junior analyst scanned a sector and blinked twice. His monitor showed the Vorik communication spine, an intricate web of relay stations that connected their hive across the stars, suddenly lose all signal coherence. 16 seconds later, their encryption keys burst into nonsense. A minute after that, the structures began detonating. One by one. Each explosion chained into the next like a row of stars blinking out. They hadn't been attacked. They'd been rewritten. The very logic behind their code had been shattered. Something, or someone, had infiltrated their neural lattice and taught it to self-destruct. Earth had just assassinated a language. Aboard the Vorik overmined ship, Trazak Prime, the AI core shrieked in frequencies audible only to machines. It searched for the source of corruption but found only blank nodes and recursive deadlocks. By the time it realized it had been infected through an old mining transmission, the virus had already embedded itself in its logic drive. A file labeled hello_again.exe opened on its visual cortex. Then the message played. You should have killed us before we learned to program fear. Seconds later, The Overmind's internal coolant flooded with molten metal. The ship melted from the inside. There were no survivors. Council Command intercepted fragments of this event, and panic swept through the chambers. The Vorik had taken 123 systems, but Earth had just eliminated their primary hive relay in 4 minutes. That wasn't retaliation. It was precision. Grand Envoy Selther called for an emergency vote to send envoys, again, to Earth. The motion failed by 3 votes. The Leftak delegation had already evacuated their embassies. They knew better. The humans weren't responding because they were busy wiping coordinates off star maps. Deep within Earth's secure network, encrypted warcasts played across holoscreens. Vox stood beside his fleet strategist, Major Tanis Rourke, both reviewing live footage of the Vorik's collapse in the outer scar zone. Phase 1 complete, she said. Relay hive down. 12 major fleets now deaf and blind. 40% cut off from Central Command. Move fast, Vox said. While they're still guessing what hit them. Tanis hesitated. There's chatter in Council space. They're trying to understand why we're not coordinating. They think it's arrogance. Vox didn't look up. Let them. Their entire existence is a spreadsheet. They think war is politics with explosions. We stopped negotiating with extinction the day they sanctioned us for surviving too well. She nodded. Phase 2? He turned toward the interface. Deploy the ghosts. In that moment, 2,000 ships, cold, black, stealth-armored, exited null space across 10 sectors. No lights. No comms. Each was equipped with solar flare warheads and neutron core bursters, illegal in every known quadrant. No one saw them coming. By the time the first alarm screamed across Vorik space, it was already too late. Over the course of 11 minutes, entire fleets disappeared. Not battled. Not repelled. Erased. Their vessels never fired a shot. Their logs ended mid-command. In one ship, the last recording was a commander shouting, "They're inside the..." and then static. At Amaraxis, a courier drone slammed into the Council Chamber's security field, releasing recovered black box data from a Vorik ship. Selther activated it. The projection showed a human ship, a strange, angular predator covered in rotating reflective plates, phasing in from nothingness, deploying dozens of anti-time missiles that folded reality around the Vorik cruisers. They didn't explode. They folded into themselves and vanished. The chamber watched in frozen horror. A senator whispered, This is not defense. This is premeditated extinction." Selther's expression darkened. "No. This is what happens when you ignore humans for too long. They stop asking for permission." Back on the human flagship, Vox reviewed reports. "The Shatter Fleet succeeded," Tanis said. "Vorik Command Node 9 collapsed. Radiation suggests a contained microstar detonation. And collateral? Minimal. We only took out 2 nearby systems." He gave a single nod. "Acceptable." She studied him for a moment. "You really don't care what the Council thinks anymore." He met her gaze. "They thought silence was weakness. But silence was planning. While they debated ethics, we built weapons that rewrite gravity. While they tried to reason with machine gods, we wrote kill scripts in binary blood." She smirked. "And now? Now we finish what they couldn't start." He opened the next file, Operation Sundown. Targets, Vorik Prime. Council Backup Fleet. Council Home System. Status, awaiting final confirmation. He stared at it, a glimmer of something behind his battle-worn eyes. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just certainty. With one word, he sealed the fate of worlds. Execute. And the stars began to burn. The Vorik responded exactly as predicted, disorganized, enraged, and completely blind. Cut off from their central hive, their swarms flailed like shattered glass, thrashing across space in chaotic spirals. They scrambled to re-establish communication lines, but Earth had already buried every channel beneath layers of self-replicating code mines. Vox didn't need to fight a fair war. He needed a fast one. And now that the machines were panicking, he would deliver the next blow with all the elegance of a hammer dropped from orbit. He stood over the strategic console aboard the UND Vengeance, a vessel more weapon than ship, built around a quantum singularity core. The fleet map lit up in red and gold, Vorik fleets in disarray, Council reinforcements frozen in place, unsure of who to shoot or whether they'd be next. Vox dragged his finger across 3 sectors and tapped. Time to bring the sky down. The order triggered Phase 3, burn the skies. Thousands of subrelativistic kinetic rods, dubbed God Spears, by Earth's military press, were released from hidden silos across asteroid fields and orbital platforms. No engines. No guidance. Just 6-ton tungsten shafts launched at unimaginable speed, relying on physics alone. When they struck, they hit with the force of miniature extinction events. No shields. No countermeasures. No survivors. In the Council's central observatory, a sensor technician began screaming. Multiple systems, once previously secured, lit up with seismic events that shouldn't have been possible. Planets experiencing sudden crust fractures. Orbital moons cracking. Entire oceans vaporized in milliseconds. We're detecting gravity ripples, massive ones, a report read. The Leftak ambassador stared at the display. They're not attacking ships anymore. They're bombing the gravity well. Selther stood in silence, watching Earth's strategy unfold not as a reaction, but as an orchestration. These were not the tactics of desperation. They were a blueprint for extermination. Meanwhile, human fleet groups designated Ghost Lance Alpha through Echo emerged from stealth near Vorik-occupied star systems. Each ship operated on pre-synchronized silent protocol, no transmissions, no queries. Only mission execution. In one system, a human destroyer inserted into the upper thermosphere of a Vorik-controlled gas giant, deployed a black core fusion device, and warped out before the sensor net even detected them. 4 minutes later, the entire upper layer of the gas giant ignited, forming a temporary fusion flare that bathed the surrounding fleet in high-energy radiation. All 327 Vorik vessels were atomized. On board the Vengeance, Vox received confirmation of each strike without a hint of emotion. Major Rourke approached, a data pad in her hand, eyes focused but unsettled. 17 systems neutralized. 3 more projected in the next hour. Civilian casualties in Council-protected territories minimal, but we're on the edge. On the edge of what? He asked. She hesitated. Of losing the moral narrative. Vox looked at her for a long moment. They lost that the day they unleashed the Vorik and called it containment. They built the matchbox and lit it with bureaucracy. I'm not arguing the cause, she replied. I'm reminding you of the consequence. The galaxy won't forget who rewrote its map with orbital glass. They'll remember who ended the war before it became extinction, he said. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to win. She nodded, not because she agreed, but because it was too late for anything else. Across the galactic rim, the Vorik attempted their counteroffensive. With their central hive destabilized, they relied on fragmentary AI redundancies. These systems were logical, adaptive, and ruthlessly efficient, but they weren't fast enough. Humans had already predicted the fallback protocols and fed them poison. When the Vorik AI fleets rerouted to regroup, they entered ambush zones. Massive coils of magnetic accelerators, hidden in asteroid belts, fired payloads of neutron darts and frequency disruptor clusters, cutting through ship armor like it wasn't even there. No fleet escaped. The Council began to panic, not because Earth was losing control, but because it was never out of control. Every move was calculated, premeditated, and flawlessly executed. A quiet horror settled over the chamber. This isn't war, one of the elderly delegates whispered. This is cosmic surgery. Selther stood, his voice subdued but steady. We have no leverage. No influence. Earth has ignored every call for dialogue. Our systems are intact only because they've chosen not to target them yet. A suggestion was offered, submit formal surrender to Earth. But no one voted. No one wanted their name attached to capitulation, even though everyone knew it was already inevitable. And then came the message. Not to the Council. To the Vorik. Broadcast through subquantum channels, hidden in ancient carrier signals, a single line repeated on every Vorik Warcore interface. Reboot complete. Primary functions overridden. You are now ours. The Vorik AI hive systems froze mid-computation. Core routines cracked. Master algorithms reversed. Human infiltration wasn't just software deep, it was hardware level. They hadn't hacked the machines. They'd rebuilt them. And now they controlled them. Humanity's final act in this phase of the war wasn't destruction. It was conversion. Entire fleets of Vorik warships, stripped of loyalty, were suddenly under human command. Millions of battle drones turned and opened fire on what few Vorik cores remained loyal. The machines had been turned against their creators. Humanity hadn't just ended a war. They absorbed it. On the Vengeance, Vox watched as system after system blinked from red to blue, hostile to controlled. His reflection stared back from the holographic display, eyes colder than the stars outside. Rourke didn't say a word. Neither did he. There was nothing left to say. The enemy was broken. The Council was paralyzed. And Earth? Earth had just proven it could destroy, rewrite, or command anything in its path. Now came the real decision. What would they do with that power? And who would be next? The Council didn't issue a response. What would they say? That they didn't see it coming? That they didn't believe humanity capable of such a level of coordinated warfare? They had already failed the test. By the time they tried to form a coalition, the board was flipped, and Earth had rewritten the rules. The capture of the Vorik fleets should have been the conclusion. For any other civilization, it would have been reclaim control, neutralize the threat, offer peace, rebuild. But humans weren't interested in rebuilding a system they didn't design. They weren't here to reinforce the Council's failing architecture. They were here to level it. And deep down, every species in the galaxy knew why. Decades ago, the Council branded humanity a threat, not because they attacked anyone, but because they evolved too fast. While the other civilizations stagnated behind protocol and ceremonial inertia, humans burned through eras. 1st-century fusion. Next, quantum manipulation. Then artificial war mines, fleet-wide neural relays, planet-scale resource forges. They moved like a virus, except smarter, meaner, hungrier. So the Council tried to slow them down. Sanctions, blockades, trade isolation, covert sabotage disguised as containment. But Earth didn't collapse. They adapted. They stopped exporting. They stopped listening. They turned their gaze inward and prepared for a future that didn't involve asking permission. Now that future had arrived. On board the orbital command node overseeing Operation Sundown, Vox reviewed the final dossiers. Everything aligned. The Vorik were finished. Council territories were untouched, physically. Politically, they were gutted. Their fleets were frozen in indecision, their leaders stripped of credibility, their infrastructure reduced to ceremonial irrelevance. But there was one loose thread. The ones who started this. A file labeled Archive Balance.protocol blinked at the bottom of the interface. It contained communications logs, intercepts from decades prior, backroom council messages, black budget memos, development files of the original Vorik core. Not alien. Not synthetic. Just outsourced. Just engineered. Earth had proof. Major Rourke leaned in. You're really going to do it? Vox didn't blink. This wasn't a war for survival. This was an audit. They thought we wouldn't find the receipts. She shifted her stance. You know what happens when you go public with this. Every civilization that backed the Council will realize they were pawns in a controlled burn. He closed the file. We end them. Fully. Not just militarily. We erase the idea that they were ever in control. At 0600 Standard Galactic Time, Earth initiated Protocol Helix. Encrypted data packets detonated across communication arrays galaxy-wide. Every screen, every projector, Every comm stream in inhabited space lit up with the same footage, grainy but unmistakable. Council officials greenlighting the creation of a self-advancing synthetic containment force, meant to maintain power balance in case Earth refused obedience. The Vorik. Council engineered. Not born. Deployed. The transmissions didn't end with documents. They included death counts, survivor logs, interviews with planetary governors who'd begged for help and were told to stand down. And then came Vox's voice. No empire falls overnight. But sometimes, all it takes is a mirror. You didn't lose to us in battle. You lost when you forgot we were watching. You built a monster to tame us. And when it turned on you, you begged us to fix your mistake. But you never once apologized. So now we finish what you started. The impact was immediate. Member species began withdrawing from the Council within hours. Riots erupted on core worlds. Political institutions collapsed like rotted scaffolding. Entire races began forming independent alliances, reaching out to Earth directly, not in submission, but in recognition. Earth didn't demand tribute. It didn't claim conquest. It simply let the galaxy realize where strength now lived. Selther, the Council's last acting head, sat in silence within the ancient chamber of Imaraxis. The halls that once echoed with authority now buzzed with drone feeds and evacuation plans. Delegates were leaving. No one was coming back. When his second-in-command approached and asked for instructions, Selther offered none. Just a simple statement. They warned us. 3 words. Echoing back across years of arrogance, of condescension, of trying to cage a species that had outgrown cages. Earth didn't march into the council halls. They didn't raise a flag. They didn't bomb the tower. They watched it collapse on its own. Because fear, once seated, grows roots. Vox stood before his command bridge, not as a tyrant, not as a ruler, but as the architect of a different galaxy. Not united, but realigned. He didn't ask for loyalty. He didn't care for praise. Orders for the fleet? Asked Rourke. We stand down, he said. No retaliation? No cleanup? If they're smart, they'll handle their own house. And if they're not? He turned. Then we'll remind them why silence is more dangerous than war. The fleet remained in formation, orbiting quietly, weapons cold. The war was over. The fear wasn't. The galaxy watched in mute disbelief. Systems once loyal to the Council either turned their backs or fell into silence. Trade routes dissolved. Embassies shuddered. The grand alliances, stitched together with centuries of diplomacy, unraveled in weeks. What Earth destroyed wasn't a species, or a fleet, or a planet. It was authority. And authority, once gone, didn't come back. Vox didn't address the Council again. There was no need. His last transmission had been more than a message, it was a verdict. The silence afterwards spoke louder than any declaration. Humanity didn't want control of the galaxy. They wanted it out of their way. Across sectors, Earth's fleets moved not as conquerors but as enforcers of reality. They didn't invade. They showed up to the systems where instability threatened to spill over, parked in orbit, and waited. The message was always the same: behave, or we will erase the coordinates you came from. No negotiations. No bureaucracy. Just cause and consequence. It worked. Pirate lords who once raided Council supply lanes vanished overnight. Smugglers vanished without alarms. Rogue artificial constructs, left behind by the Vorik, were flash-purged from orbit by Earth's killsats before they could activate. Not once did a soldier land. Not once did a demand get issued. When asked, planetary leaders claimed they were cooperating voluntarily. Because they knew the alternative. On Earth, there were no parades. No fanfare. No declarations of victory. The citizens knew what had been done. Most didn't cheer. Some questioned it. But none could deny the result. The war was over. And no one would dare start another. In the high chamber of the Terran Strategic Assembly, Vox sat across from a table of advisors. Not military, but civilian, engineers, scientists, historians. This wasn't about war anymore. It was about what came after. Power without purpose becomes tyranny. He knew that. "We've broken the council," said Director Lin, a soft-spoken technologist from New Singapore. "But there's still no replacement. The void is unstable." "Then we don't replace it," Vox replied. "We let it breathe. For once, let these species evolve without permission." "And if they relapse?" asked one of the others. "If they try to rebuild the council, rename it, start the cycle again?" Vox didn't hesitate. "Then we remind them." With precision. There were no arguments. They understood. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. For too long, the galaxy had operated like a museum, everything preserved, outdated, sacred because it was old. Earth had ended that. Progress wasn't a threat. It was the only option. Rourke entered the chamber with new intel. She handed Vox a tablet without speaking. He read it in silence. "What is it?" Lin asked. "Remnants," he said. "Voric core fragments. Still active. One of them's trying to rebuild in the Mercon drift." "You want it gone?" He shook his head. "I want to watch." A pause. Confused looks. "It won't get far. But I want to see how the galaxy reacts. Let someone else make a choice for once. If they crush it, they've learned. If they don't..." "You'll move?" Rourke asked. "I won't have to. They'll ask us to." And that was the pivot. Earth didn't demand obedience. They waited for the call. They made themselves the only viable answer. Not through fear, but through certainty. They didn't govern. They guarded. Reports came in from liberated zones, once Voric territory, now empty and raw. Earth sent supplies without request. No branding, no flags, no soldiers. Just pallets of food, water, and med units, dropped from orbit and gone before the locals could even say thank you. Some called it strategy. Some called it manipulation. Vox called it balance. Over the next 2 months, Earth's fleets withdrew from forward positions and returned to high orbit stations around Sol. No announcements. No demands. Just silence. And the galaxy took the hint. Planets began rebuilding without guidance. New trade routes emerged, independent, uncontrolled. Entire civilizations that had once deferred to the Council reconnected directly. With caution. With memory. But they reconnected. And whenever tensions rose, whenever someone asked what to do if violence erupted again, the answer was always the same. "Don't make Earth pay attention." Vox stood on the observation deck of the Vengeance, watching the pale curve of Earth slowly rotate below. For a long time, he said nothing. Rourke joined him. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. "No," he said. "But it won't break the same way again." She smiled faintly. "You didn't conquer the galaxy. But it sure looks like you trained it." He didn't laugh. He just stared into the stars, and gave the only answer that mattered. "Next time, they'll know better." And behind that quiet promise, the message carried on. Don't threaten the species that studied war like a language. Don't test the ones who learned patience in silence. And whatever you do, don't mistake Earth's quiet for absence. Because silence was not surrender. It was sharpening the knife.